"Help me. I can't breathe." The words echoed through the tight limestone passage, muffled by mud and stone, swallowed by the earth itself. 26-year-old John Edward Jones had entered Nutty Putty Cave smiling, confident, eager for adventure. Less than an hour later, he found himself wedged upside down, his chest compressed in a fissure only 18 inches wide. His body strained against the rock, lungs unable to expand fully. Each second felt like a weight pressing him deeper into the dark. It was November 24th, 2009, a clear, cold evening in central Utah. John, a medical student from St. George, had driven north with his younger brother Josh and a handful of friends. Their plan seemed harmless, a few hours of caving before Thanksgiving with family. Nutty Putty was well known among locals, tight, muddy, claustrophobic, but not considered especially dangerous. Dozens of Boy Scouts had explored its passages in years past. Still, the cave had a reputation, a maze of squeezes with ominous nicknames like the Scout Trap and the Birth Canal. Few outsiders understood how quickly curiosity could turn into catastrophe here. As John pushed into a narrow chute, he believed he was entering the Birth Canal, a familiar crawlway that other cavers often used as a challenge. Instead, he had chosen the wrong fissure. The walls angled downward sharply, forcing his head below his feet. At first, he thought he could push through with one final effort. He exhaled, hoping to slide forward, but instead he slipped deeper, his arms pinned awkwardly at his sides. When he tried to inhale again, his chest met resistance. The stone did not move. "Josh," he gasped, "I'm stuck." His younger brother scrambled closer, gripping his boots, pulling with all his strength. For a moment it felt like John might come free. But then he slid farther, his body dropping to a 70-degree angle, head first into the earth. His arms were trapped beneath him, his torso twisted. Blood rushed to his head. The rock pressed against his ribs with every shallow breath. "Hold on," Josh said, panic cracking his voice. "We'll get you out." The narrow chute gave no room for leverage, no space for a proper grip. Josh tugged, kicked, twisted, but nothing worked. John's breathing grew ragged. The realization was dawning. They were in trouble far beyond what a group of amateur explorers could solve. Somewhere above them, the others laughed, unaware of the crisis brewing below. The cave was silent except for John's shallow gasps and Josh's desperate grunts. In that moment, what had begun as a holiday adventure was already shifting into something else entirely, a fight for survival against stone and time. Outside, the desert was still, stars bright over Utah's west desert hills. Inside, beneath 60 feet of limestone, a man fought for every breath, suspended upside down in the unforgiving dark. No one knew yet that John would remain trapped there for 28 hours, hours that would stretch into the most desperate rescue effort in Utah's caving history. The entrance to Nutty Putty Cave was nothing more than a dark slit in the ground, half hidden by brush and weathered rock. To the untrained eye, it looked insignificant, a narrow wound in Utah's desert soil. But for cavers, this was a portal into a twisting maze beneath the earth. Over 1,600 feet of tight passages, crawls, and squeezes carved into soft limestone. That evening, the group approached with nervous excitement. Flashlights cut across the dirt slope, illuminating the steel gate that marked the cave's opening. The gate had been locked for years after a series of near-fatal incidents, but it had recently reopened under strict rules. For John and his companions, the timing felt perfect, a chance to test themselves in one of the state's most infamous caves. They checked their gear, helmets, headlamps, gloves, knee pads. Nothing fancy. They weren't here for a multi-day expedition, just a few hours underground before Thanksgiving. Laughter carried through the cool night air as Josh teased John about always leading the way. John smirked, adjusting his lamp. "If you get lost," he said, "just follow my boots." The first crawl into the earth was like a ritual, voices muffled as stone walls pressed closer. The air cooled instantly, damp with the faint smell of clay and minerals. The silence inside was sharp, broken only by the scuff of boots against rock. For most of the group, the transition from open desert to enclosed tunnel triggered the usual surge of adrenaline, a mix of excitement and unease. In the first chambers, the passages widened enough for them to kneel or crouch. The scout trap appeared early. a narrow test passage notorious among local cavers. Some of the group wriggled through, laughing nervously as their bodies scraped against smooth limestone. Others skipped it, preferring wider routes. The sound of amusement echoed strangely, bouncing off the slick walls like whispers. John moved confidently, pointing out formations and identifying familiar turns. Years earlier, the cave had been closed after rescuers hauled several trapped explorers to safety. He knew the stories, but his tone was casual. "It's all about staying calm," he told his brother. "If you don't panic, you can get through anything down here." Still, the cave demanded respect. Every inch forward required crawling, sliding, or twisting through angles designed to test the limits of human flexibility. The mud coated their gloves, smeared across helmets, clung to their clothes. In some spots, water dripped steadily, cold against the back of the neck. Yet the group pressed on, their lamps carving golden beams across the walls. For now, spirits remained high. The cave felt alive, a labyrinth waiting to be conquered. No one could sense the danger waiting deeper in the rock, the one wrong turn that would change everything. As the entrance faded behind them, swallowed by distance and stone, the group crawled deeper into the belly of Nutty Putty. Each passage narrowed. Each squeeze demanded more effort. The darkness grew heavier, and the silence pressed closer. And at the head of the line, John led with steady determination, unaware that the cave had already chosen him. The first stretch of exploration was exhilarating. The passages twisted like veins, some wide enough to crouch, others forcing the group onto their stomachs. Their lamps revealed glistening clay walls, streaked with minerals that shimmered under the artificial light. The cave's temperature remained constant, cool and slightly damp, the kind of air that clung to skin and chilled sweat. Every breath carried the earthy scent of limestone mixed with the metallic tang of mud. John's voice carried ahead as he guided his brother and friends through the familiar zones. "This is the big slide," he called out, gesturing toward a sloping chute that funneled explorers into a larger room. Josh followed closely, laughing as his boots slipped on the slick clay. Others behind them echoed the sound, their amusement bouncing oddly in the enclosed space. For a while, the group treated the cave like a playground. They joked, took turns crawling through the scout trap again, and compared who could squeeze through the narrowest cracks. The thrill of discovery mixed with the harmless competitiveness of siblings and friends. To them, Nutty Putty was intimidating but manageable, its dangers still hidden beneath the surface. But hints of trouble were already there. In one passage, loose stones shifted beneath a climber's weight, clattering against the walls before falling into the dark. In another, the ceiling dipped low enough to force helmets against the rock, sparks of sound scraping in the silence. The tighter the passages became, the more each explorer felt the earth pressing down, a reminder of just how fragile their freedom of movement was underground. Josh hesitated once, staring at a particularly narrow squeeze. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. John grinned, brushing mud from his gloves. "It looks worse than it is. Trust me." His confidence was infectious, and Josh followed, even as doubt lingered in his expression. The contrast between confidence and caution defined their progress. Some members of the group joked loudly, filling the tunnels with forced laughter. Others grew quieter, conserving their energy, focusing on every movement. A misplaced step or a bad shift of weight could mean disaster. Still, they pressed deeper. The further they went, the more oppressive the cave felt. The mud grew stickier, clinging to knees and elbows. Breathing grew heavier, the stale air thick with humidity. Lamps flickered against walls that seemed to close in with every turn. Yet John seemed at ease. He crawled without hesitation, guiding the group toward smaller, more challenging passages. For him, Nutty Putty wasn't just a cave. It was a test of will, a puzzle to be solved. And as he pushed forward, he unknowingly carried them closer to the decision that would define the rest of the night. In the stillness, deep underground, the laughter began to fade. The only sounds left were the scrape of boots against limestone and the steady rhythm of shallow breaths. The cave had stopped feeling like a playground. It was becoming something else, a silent opponent waiting for one mistake. The atmosphere shifted as the group ventured deeper. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the smell of damp clay and minerals. Passages narrowed until the walls pressed against shoulders and hips, forcing everyone into slow, deliberate movements. The faint sounds of laughter from earlier had vanished, replaced by silence broken only by grunts of effort and the scrape of helmets against stone. Nutty Putty had its landmarks, places with names whispered like warnings: the Scout Trap, the Birth Canal, the Big Slide. Each was notorious, a reminder of past explorers who had nearly become permanent residents. Some passages bore scratches from helmets and boots, faint signatures of those who had fought their way through before. To anyone paying attention, these marks were both a guide and a warning. John moved ahead confidently, though his breathing had grown heavier. His brother Josh followed close, his nerves evident in the tight grip of his flashlight. "This feels different," Josh muttered, his voice bouncing down the tunnel. John brushed the concern away. "It's just the cave playing tricks on you. Stay calm. We're fine." The fissures grew tighter, angled down like a stone funnel. In the beam of his headlamp, John spotted what looked like the entrance to the Birth Canal, a passage he had wanted to show Josh. It was famous among cavers, a claustrophobic squeeze that tested even the most experienced. To John, it was a challenge worth taking. Josh hesitated. "Are you sure that's the one?" he asked. His voice cracked, betraying unease. John didn't pause. "Yeah, trust me. This is it." The others stayed behind in a larger chamber, content not to push further into the constriction. John pressed forward, his chest scraping stone as he slithered into the opening. At first it felt manageable, a routine crawl. The limestone pressed close, but that was expected. He exhaled, pushing his body deeper, convinced he could slide through with one strong push, but the tunnel angled down more steeply than he expected. The space tightened, pressing against his shoulders and ribs. He tried to adjust, twisting slightly to ease the pressure, but every movement only wedged him deeper. Josh crouched behind, shining his lamp down the chute. "John, how's it look?" "It's fine," John called back, though his voice carried a strain. "Just tighter than I thought." Josh bit his lip, uneasy. "We can turn back, you know. No shame in that." But John pressed on. Backing out felt harder than pushing forward, and the goal, what he thought was the Birth Canal, was just ahead. The cave seemed to whisper around him, its silence pressing against his heartbeat. Then, without realizing it, John had passed the point of no return. His chest squeezed against rock. His arms bent awkwardly, trapped. His body slid lower, head first into the earth. And in that moment, what had been a choice became a trap. The squeeze tightened until John could no longer move. The limestone walls pressed against his ribs, his arms pinned at awkward angles. His head angled downward into a slope so steep it felt like falling into the earth itself. Gravity dragged at his body, forcing blood into his head, swelling his face, pounding behind his eyes. Every breath became a shallow gasp, chest straining against immovable stone. "I'm stuck," he called out, his voice sharp with panic. Josh's lamp shook as he scrambled closer. He gripped his brother's boots and pulled with all his strength. The soles slipped against his hands smeared with clay. John groaned, his body shifting slightly, hope flickering, then sliding deeper. He sank until his torso was wedged at nearly 70 degrees, head down in a crack barely 14 inches across and 10 inches high. "Hold on, John, don't panic," Josh shouted, though his own voice trembled. He tried again, bracing his knees against rock, yanking hard, but the cave gave nothing back. The harder he pulled, the deeper John seemed to sink. The darkness amplified every sound, the scrape of boots, the harsh rasp of breathing, the dull thud of Josh's efforts. John's voice echoed strangely, muffled by the rock around him. "I can't breathe right," he gasped. His chest compressed tighter with every shallow inhale. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, faster than he wanted to admit. Josh's panic rose. He shouted for help, his voice cracking as it carried back toward the others. Footsteps scraped against the stone as friends hurried forward, crowding into the narrow chamber. Lamps flickered across muddy walls, beams of light cutting through the claustrophobic dark. From his trapped position, John could see almost nothing. His world had narrowed to the pounding in his skull, the weight on his lungs, the unforgiving stone pressing into his bones. He shifted his hips, searching desperately for room, But every attempt wedged him tighter. His arms were useless, pinned against his sides. His body trembled with effort. "Don't move too much," Josh warned. "You'll get stuck worse." John let out a bitter laugh that broke into a cough. Too late for that. The group tried pulling, pushing, twisting his boots in every direction, but the passage offered no leverage. Each attempt ended the same way, with John gasping harder, the stone unyielding. Fear crept into the chamber, infecting everyone present. What had been an adventurous crawl had become a nightmare. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Sweat dripped from foreheads, breath fogged in the damp air. John closed his eyes for a moment, forcing calm, whispering a prayer under his breath. He wanted to believe they would get him out. He had to believe it. But deep inside, the cave was already closing its grip. The stone that had promised challenge now promised something else, a prison that would not let go. And as his body strained against the earth, the fight for John's life had only just begun. The first rescue attempts failed almost immediately. No matter how hard Josh and the others pulled, the rock refused to release its grip. Every movement only wedged John tighter, the limestone closing around him like a vice. The cave was silent except for the rasp of his breathing, each inhale shorter than the last. Word spread quickly through the group. They couldn't do this alone. One of the explorers scrambled out of the cave, racing to call emergency services. Time ticked forward in suffocating silence while Josh stayed by his brother's boots, whispering reassurance that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Rescue's coming," he said. "Just hang in there." John tried to nod, but pinned as he was, only a strained grunt escaped. He shifted his body slightly, searching for an angle, but the stone answered with sharp pressure against his chest. His lungs compressed further, refusing to fill completely. A wave of dizziness washed through him, the pounding in his skull growing heavier. Hours later, the first trained rescuers arrived. They slid into the narrow chamber, headlamps casting sharp beams across mud-stained walls. Their gear rattled, ropes, pulleys, drills, carabiners, all crowded into the cramped space. The air smelled of sweat and damp clay. The rescuers moved with precision, but beneath their calm voices was urgency. They rigged a rope system to John's legs, anchoring it to bolts hammered into the rock. On the first pull, his body shifted upward an inch. Relief swept through the chamber until the rope slipped, and John slid back into the same position, his groan echoing off the limestone. Attempts multiplied. Pull, slip, reset. Each failure stole more hope. Meanwhile, the environment turned hostile. The lamps flickered in the damp air. The mud thickened under knees and hands, slick with sweat. Every rescuer who entered felt the stone pressing closer, the air growing staler. The cave itself seemed to conspire against them. John's voice weakened. "How long has it been?" he asked, though the words came out slurred. His brother's eyes stung. "Not long. You're doing great." But it had already been hours. Blood had pooled in John's head from the inverted position. His face swelled, his breathing grew shallow, and his strength ebbed with every attempt to move. The rescuers adjusted, tried new angles, drilled deeper for anchor points, but the limestone cracked unpredictably, threatening collapse. Tension spread like a contagion. Some rescuers argued in hushed tones, whether to try a different pulley system, whether to keep drilling. Others stared at John, fear gnawing at the edges of their professionalism. Every passing minute felt heavier than the last. Inside the narrow chamber, hope was thinning. The cave was winning, and everyone knew it. By the time night had fallen outside, John had been stuck for nearly 10 hours. His breaths came ragged, shallow, his voice now a whisper. And as rescuers exchanged grim looks, one thought weighed on them all. The worst was yet to come. The cave had turned into a battlefield between stone and time. John had now been trapped for more than 12 hours, and every failed attempt carved despair deeper into the faces of rescuers. His body remained at the same crushing angle, head below his heart, blood rushing endlessly into his skull. Each shallow breath sounded weaker, each pause between words stretched longer. "Stay with me, John," Josh urged, his voice trembling. He held his brother's boots as if his grip alone could keep him alive. John groaned in reply, barely coherent. Above ground, reinforcements arrived. More than 100 people, rescuers, medics, engineers, volunteers. The area around the cave lit up with floodlights, tents, and equipment. Families gathered, huddled together in the freezing night. Among them was John's wife, Emily, 7 months pregnant. She clutched her belly, eyes fixed on the cave entrance, silently begging for news. Inside, rescuers worked tirelessly. They drilled new anchor points, trying to design a pulley system strong enough to haul John upward. The plan was risky. The limestone was brittle, and too much force could shatter the rock around him, burying him alive. Still, it was the only option. Hours bled into one another. The pulley strained under the rescuers' combined effort. John's body shifted upward, inch by inch. Hope surged through the narrow tunnel until a sharp crack echoed. One of the bolts ripped free from the wall, the rope recoiled, and John slipped back into his original position. His scream was muffled, cut short by exhaustion. Silence followed. The failure crushed morale. Rescuers slumped against the walls, sweat dripping from helmets, their gloves caked in clay. The system had nearly worked, yet now it seemed impossible. "Try again," Josh demanded, but his voice broke. "We can't stop." The lead rescuer shook his head. "If we keep pulling, the rock could give way. It's too unstable." Meanwhile, John's strength drained. His words came faint, sometimes incoherent. "Tell Emily, I love her," he whispered once, barely audible. Josh choked on his reply, refusing to accept the finality in his brother's tone. The rescuers rotated in shifts, some resting briefly before crawling back into the suffocating chamber. Every attempt grew slower, weaker, as exhaustion set in. Mud coated their faces, arms trembled with fatigue, voices cracked with desperation. Outside, hours had stretched into a full day. Reporters gathered. Authorities debated whether to continue the operation at all. But underground, no one wanted to give up, not while John still breathed. Still, with each passing minute, the truth grew heavier. The cave wasn't letting go. Hope thinned like the flickering beams of their lamps. By the 24th hour, John's body had grown pale, his words nearly gone. The rescuers stared at him in grim silence, torn between duty and reality. And as exhaustion consumed both the trapped man and his would-be saviors, one chilling thought lingered in the stale, damp air. Time was running out. By the second night, the rescue had become a test of endurance no one was winning. John had been upside down for nearly 26 hours. His face was swollen, his breathing shallow, his voice reduced to faint murmurs that barely carried through the stone. Every attempt to free him had failed, but no one was willing to give up. The chamber buzzed with frantic planning. Rescuers debated drilling a wider shaft, though the limestone cracked unpredictably with every strike. Others argued for a new pulley design, stronger and anchored differently. Each option carried risk, collapse, further injury, or the irreversible silence of failure. They chose to try again. The rescuers anchored new bolts into the cave wall, setting up a revised pulley system. The chamber filled with the metallic clink of carabiners, the scrape of drills, the muttered prayers of men who knew they were out of time. Sweat dripped into the mud as helmets knocked against stone. When everything was ready, the lead rescuer gave the signal. The rope strained, muscles burned as they pulled together. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, John's body began to shift upward. His boots scraped against stone, his torso edged higher. "Keep going," Josh pleaded, clutching the rope with the others. "He's moving!" For the first time in more than a day, hope surged through the chamber. Inches turned into feet. John groaned, his voice raspy but alive. His chest expanded slightly easier, his breathing a fraction deeper. The rescuers gritted their teeth, pulling harder. Then, with a crack that echoed like gunfire, one of the anchor bolts ripped free. The system lurched. The rope snapped downward. John slipped back into the fissure, deeper than before. His scream tore through the cave, then cut off abruptly as the stone reclaimed him. Chaos erupted. Rescuers cursed, scrambling to steady the rig before more anchors failed. Dust and fragments rained from the limestone ceiling. Josh's hands shook violently as he gripped his brother's boots, his voice breaking into sobs. The chamber went still again, save for John's ragged gasps. His breaths came short, staggered, fading with each passing second. The rescuers sat in silence, the weight of the failure pressing heavier than the rock itself. Above ground, news reached the surface. The crowd of family and volunteers went quiet. Emily pressed a hand against her stomach, tears streaming as she realized hope was slipping away. Back underground, rescuers regrouped, but their energy was gone. Tools lay scattered, ropes slack against the mud. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the truth was written in every exhausted face. There might not be another chance. John's groans softened to whispers. His eyes fluttered shut, then opened again weakly. Time itself seemed to pause in that suffocating darkness. One last attempt loomed, a final desperate push before the cave decided the outcome once and for all. The silence in the chamber deepened, broken only by the faint rasp of John's breathing. Nearly 28 hours had passed since he had crawled into the wrong fissure. His body hung limp, swollen from the relentless pressure of blood forced downward into his head and chest. Each shallow gasp was slower than the last, his strength consumed by the crushing weight of the cave. Rescuers crouched around him, their faces drawn, their gloves caked with mud. They had tried everything: ropes, pulleys, anchors, drills. Every system had failed. Now they watched helplessly as his life slipped away in front of them. Josh still clung to his brother's boots, whispering through tears, "Stay with me, John. Just hold on. Emily's waiting. You can do this." His words shook, more plea than encouragement. John stirred faintly, lips moving. The rescuers leaned closer, straining to hear. "Love you. Tell Emily." The rest faded into the stone, his eyes half closed, unfocused, drifting beyond the chamber. A medic squeezed into the narrow space, pressing a hand against John's ankle, searching for signs. His expression hardened. He checked again, then looked at the others. The silence that followed was heavier than the cave itself. "Cardiac arrest," he whispered. The words echoed like a death sentence. Josh broke, his sobs echoing off the limestone walls. Rescuers bowed their heads, some pressing muddy gloves to their faces, others slamming fists against the stone in frustrated grief. They had fought for nearly 30 hours, but the cave had won. Above ground, the message traveled slowly, as if no one wanted to be the one to deliver it. When the truth reached the surface, Emily collapsed against a family member, clutching her stomach as sobs shook her body. She had prayed for a miracle, but the miracle never came. Back inside, the chamber dimmed as rescuers shut off unnecessary lamps. There was nothing left to do. John's body remained wedged in the fissure, unreachable without risking more lives. The decision was agonizing but clear. Recovery was impossible. The cave had claimed him. Slowly, one by one, rescuers backed out of the passage, their movements heavy with defeat. Josh lingered the longest, pressing his forehead against the soles of John's boots, whispering prayers through sobs until he was gently pulled away. The chamber fell silent, holding within it the final breaths of a man who had fought as long as his body allowed. Nutty Putty Cave had sealed its grip, and John Jones would never leave. Above ground, dawn crept across the Utah desert. The entrance stood quiet, floodlights flickering against pale stone. Families huddled in silence, holding one another as the enormity of the tragedy sank in. The fight was over, and the cave, indifferent and unyielding, had taken another life. The rescue was officially called off on the morning of November 25, 2009. After nearly 30 hours of effort, the decision was final. John Edward Jones would remain where he was, entombed in the rock. The fissure was too narrow, the risk of collapse too high. No technology available could extract him without endangering more lives. Above ground, the site fell silent. The floodlights dimmed. The crowd of rescuers and family members stood in shock. Emily, 7 months pregnant, pressed both hands to her stomach, her tears falling onto the desert soil. She had spoken to John through the narrow opening hours earlier, promising him strength, promising him that their unborn daughter would know his name. Now, those words were all she had left. Officials made the grim announcement: Nutty Putty Cave would be permanently sealed. Within days, concrete was poured into the entrance, closing the labyrinth forever. The decision was controversial. Some wanted to recover John's body for burial, but the cave was too unstable. He would remain there, his final resting place deep beneath Utah's desert. News of the tragedy spread across the nation. Headlines captured the horror of a young father trapped upside down in stone for more than a day. To the public, the image was unforgettable. A man fighting against time and rock, with rescuers powerless to save him. For cavers, it was a chilling reminder that the earth can turn fatal in minutes. In the aftermath, Nutty Putty became more than just another cave. It became a symbol of risk, of the razor-thin line between adventure and disaster. Though sealed, its story continues to haunt explorers, families, and anyone who has ever wondered what it feels like to be swallowed alive by the earth. Emily later gave birth to a baby girl who would grow up never knowing her father. For John's family, his loss became an open wound, a reminder of how quickly joy can twist into tragedy. For the rescuers, it was a memory etched permanently into their minds, the sound of his voice weakening, the weight of their failure, the helplessness of watching a man slip beyond reach. Nutty Putty Cave remains sealed, a tomb hidden beneath desert brush. The land above is quiet, giving no hint of the labyrinth below. Yet to those who know the story, the silence is heavy, as if the earth itself remembers. John Edward Jones entered the cave seeking adventure. What he found was something far different, an encounter with the raw, merciless power of nature. His story stands as a warning. Beneath the surface, even the smallest wrong turn can become a trap with no escape. One wrong choice, one wrong fissure, and a life was lost forever. Follow for more true stories of caves that never forgive, where the line between thrill and tragedy is only a breath away.